The rain fell in relentless sheets as Elena sped through the streets of downtown Chicago. Her worn-out sneakers slapped against the pavement, water splashing up to soak the hems of her slacks. The damp air clung to her skin, but she barely noticed. She was late. Again. Elena's job as a paralegal at Jennings & Wright, one of the city's top law firms, wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, or it would have, if she weren't always one step away from losing it. Her boss, the icy and imperious Victoria Hayes, had already given her a final warning last week. One more slip-up and she'd be out. This time, it wasn't even her fault. Her younger sister, Ava, had called sobbing at 2 a.m., struggling to manage her newborn while her husband was away on a business trip. Elena had rushed over, and between rocking the baby and trying to calm her sister, she'd barely gotten 2 hours of sleep. Now, as she sprinted toward the towering office building, clutching her umbrella that was more broken than functional, she knew she wouldn't make it before the morning meeting began. Just as she reached the corner of 5th and Main, a loud screech of tires cut through the sound of rain. Her eyes snapped to the source of the noise, a sleek black sedan skidding out of control. The driver, a man in his mid-50s with graying hair and a panicked expression, seemed to be struggling to regain control. The car fishtailed violently, heading straight for a pedestrian in the crosswalk. Elena's heart lurched as she saw the man, a tall figure in an expensive-looking trench coat, frozen in shock. Without thinking, she dropped her umbrella and charged forward. Her shoes slipped on the wet pavement, but she kept going, adrenaline pumping through her veins. "Move," she screamed. The man turned too late, and Elena lunged, grabbing his arm and yanking him out of the way just as the sedan screeched to a halt mere inches from where they'd been standing. They tumbled to the ground, the man landing awkwardly on top of her. Her elbow scraped against the concrete, but she ignored the pain. The scent of rain-soaked asphalt and his expensive cologne filled her nose as he scrambled off her. "Are you okay?" she asked, breathless. He stared at her, his blue eyes wide with shock. I think so." Elena helped him to his feet, her hands trembling from the rush of adrenaline. The driver of the sedan jumped out, apologizing profusely, but Elena barely heard him. She was too busy checking the man she'd saved for injuries. "You're bleeding," she said, noticing a small gash on his forehead. "It's nothing," he muttered, his voice deep and commanding. Despite his disheveled state, he had an air of authority about him, the kind that made people stop and listen. "I should call an ambulance," Elena said, fumbling for her phone. "No," he said sharply, holding up a hand. "It's just a scratch. But, thank you. You may have just saved my life." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Victoria, "You're late. My office. Now." Panic surged through her. She glanced at the time, 9:12 a.m. She was supposed to be at her desk 12 minutes ago. I have to go," she stammered, stepping back. The man reached out, his expression softening. "Wait. Let me." But she was already running, her heart pounding as much from the rescue as from the looming threat of Victoria's wrath. By the time she reached the office, she was soaked to the bone, her scraped elbow throbbing. Victoria was waiting, her arms crossed and a look of icy disdain on her perfectly made-up face. "Elena," she said, her voice cold enough to freeze the rain still dripping from Elena's hair. "My office. Now." Elena opened her mouth to explain, but Victoria raised a hand to silence her. "I don't want to hear excuses. This is the 3rd time this month. You're fired." The words hit Elena like a punch to the gut. Her job, her one source of stability, was gone. As she walked out of the office in a daze, the man from the crosswalk was the last thing on her mind. She had no idea that their paths would cross again, under circumstances she never could have imagined. The subway ride home was a blur. Elena sat hunched in her seat, her wet clothes clinging to her skin, her scraped elbow stinging with every jostle of the train. "Fired. The word echoed in her mind, louder with every passing second. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the loss of her job or the cold, unyielding way Victoria had delivered the news. By the time she reached her small apartment, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. What was she going to do? Rent was due in 2 weeks, and her savings account barely had enough to cover groceries. A knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but the knocking grew more insistent. With a sigh, she pulled herself up and opened the door. Standing there, looking slightly out of place in her modest hallway, was the man from the crosswalk. He'd changed out of his rain-soaked trench coat into a tailored suit, but the small gash on his forehead was a reminder of their earlier encounter. "You," Elena said, blinking in surprise. "Me," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but you ran off before I could properly thank you." Elena hesitated, gripping the doorframe. "How did you find me?" He held up a small leather wallet. "You dropped this in the chaos." She took it from him, her face flushing as she realized her ID and address were inside. "Oh. Right. Thanks. May I come in?" he asked. "I promise, this won't take long." Elena stepped aside, unsure of what else to do. As he entered, she caught a better look at him. He exuded wealth and confidence, the kind of man who probably dined at Michelin-starred restaurants and never worried about overdue bills. "I never got your name," he said, turning to face her. "Elena. Elena Torres." "Well, Elena," he said, extending a hand. "I'm James Mercer." The name rang a bell, but she couldn't place it. She shook his hand, his grip firm but not overpowering. "I owe you my life," James said, his tone earnest. "Most people would have frozen, but you didn't hesitate." "I can't tell you how grateful I am." Elena shifted uncomfortably. "I just reacted." Anyone would have done the same. "Not everyone," he said, his gaze steady. "And I'd like to repay you." Her heart sank. She didn't want charity, especially not from a stranger. "That's really not necessary." "Please," he interrupted gently. "Hear me out. This morning, I wasn't just walking to work. I was heading to an important meeting at my company, Mercer Enterprises." The name clicked. Mercer Enterprises was a Fortune 500 company, one of the biggest in the country. "I didn't make it to that meeting," James continued, his expression darkening. "But when I explained what happened, my team insisted I take the rest of the day off. While I was reviewing some reports at home, I came across something troubling." Elena tilted her head, unsure of where this was going. "You work, or worked, at Jennings and Wright, correct?" Her stomach tightened. "Yes. Until this morning. That's what I wanted to discuss." He hesitated, then added, "Jennings and Wright is one of our primary legal partners. When I heard you were fired, I looked into the situation. I spoke to Victoria Hayes." The mention of her former boss made Elena's skin crawl. "Why would you do that?" "Because firing someone for being late, especially under extenuating circumstances like yours, struck me as excessive." I wanted to understand her reasoning. Elena's cheeks burned with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," he said firmly. "And what I found was unacceptable. Victoria had no legitimate reason to fire you, Elena. She used it as an excuse because of some personal vendetta." Her jaw tightened. That certainly sounded like Victoria. "I confronted her," James continued. "And effective immediately, she's no longer with the firm." Elena's eyes widened. "Wait. You fired her?" He nodded. "I don't tolerate unethical behavior, especially not from people representing my company's interests." For a moment, Elena didn't know what to say. The woman who had loomed over her life like a storm cloud was gone, just like that. I understand this doesn't fix everything, James said, breaking the silence. So I have another proposal. Mercer Enterprises is always looking for sharp, resourceful individuals. I'd like to offer you a position on my legal support team. It won't be glamorous at first, but it comes with a stable salary and plenty of opportunities to grow. Her mind reeled. Was this really happening? You don't even know me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know enough, he replied. You're brave, quick thinking, and you saved my life. That's a good start, don't you think? Elena stared at him, torn between disbelief and hope. After the day she'd had, this felt like a lifeline, but it also felt too good to be true. Take your time to think about it, James added, pulling a business card from his pocket and placing it on her coffee table. Call me when you've decided. And with that, he turned and left, leaving Elena standing in her tiny apartment, clutching the card and wondering if her life had just changed forever. For 2 days, James Mercer's business card sat on Elena's coffee table, taunting her. She'd picked it up more than once, running her fingers over the embossed letters and the Mercer Enterprises logo. Each time, she put it back down. Elena knew she should be grateful. People didn't just stumble into opportunities like this. And yet, doubt gnawed at her. Was she really the type of person who belonged in a company like Mercer Enterprises? Her career had always been a patchwork of odd jobs and temporary contracts. She'd clawed her way into Jennings and Wright, and even there, she'd felt like an outsider, never polished enough, never confident enough. What if she failed? On the 3rd day, her sister Ava called. Elena, what's going on? Ava's voice was filled with concern. You haven't answered my texts. I'm fine, Elena lied, cradling the phone against her ear as she stared at the card. You're not fine. You got fired, didn't you? Elena sighed. Yes. But something weird happened after. The man I helped, he offered me a job at his company. There was a beat of silence. Wait. The guy from the crosswalk? What kind of job? Legal support. It's not exactly what I was doing before, but he said there's room to grow. And you haven't said yes yet? Ava's tone shifted to disbelief. I don't know, Ava. It feels too good to be true. What if I'm not ready for this? Elena. Ava's voice was firm now. Do you remember what you told me last week, when I was freaking out about whether I could handle being a mom? Elena frowned. What did I say? You said, nobody feels ready for the big things, but you do them anyway because you're stronger than you think. Elena groaned. You're using my own advice against me? Damn right I am, Ava said with a laugh. You're not just strong, Elena, you're brilliant. Take the job. If you don't, you'll always wonder what could have happened. Ava was right, of course. The truth was, Elena did want to take the job, desperately. She was just afraid of what it would mean to step into a world so far removed from everything she knew. By the time she hung up, her mind was made up. She picked up the card, dialed the number, and braced herself. James answered on the second ring. Elena Torres, he said warmly. I was hoping I'd hear from you. I've thought about your offer, she said, her voice trembling slightly, and I'd like to accept. Wonderful, James said without hesitation. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I'll have HR set everything up. Tomorrow? Elena's stomach flipped. That's fast. We're a fast-paced company, he said with a hint of amusement. But don't worry, you'll have plenty of support. My team will make sure you're set up for success. They agreed on a time, and Elena hung up, staring at the phone in disbelief. It was happening. The next morning, Elena stood in front of the towering glass and steel headquarters of Mercer Enterprises. The building gleamed in the sunlight, intimidating and awe-inspiring. She took a deep breath and walked inside, clutching her bag like a lifeline. A polished receptionist greeted her and directed her to the 20th floor, where she was met by a woman named Samantha. "I'll be your mentor during the onboarding process," Samantha said, her tone brisk but not unkind. "Follow me." They walked through a maze of sleek offices and buzzing workspaces. Elena tried to take it all in: the endless rows of desks, the hum of conversation, the palpable energy of the place. When they reached a glass-walled conference room, Samantha gestured for Elena to sit. "You'll start by supporting our litigation team," Samantha explained, handing her a stack of documents. "It's a lot of reading and organizing at first, but we're looking for people who can think critically and take initiative. Based on what Mr. Mercer said about you, I think you'll do well." Elena's chest tightened. What did he say about me?" Samantha smiled. "That you're resourceful, quick under pressure, and not afraid to take risks. He seems to have a lot of faith in you." The words hit Elena like a wave. She wasn't used to people describing her that way, especially someone as powerful as James Mercer. By the end of her first day, her head was spinning. The work was challenging, but she found herself rising to the occasion, determined not to let her insecurities get the better of her. As she packed up to leave, she noticed James standing by the elevator, deep in conversation with a group of executives. He spotted her and broke away, striding over with his characteristic confidence. "How was your first day?" he asked. "Overwhelming," she admitted, "but good. I think." He smiled. "Good. That's exactly how it's supposed to feel." Elena chuckled, some of her tension easing. "Thank you, by the way. For everything. I don't know why you took a chance on me, but I'll do my best not to let you down." James's expression softened. "I didn't take a chance, Elena. I recognized potential. And if today is any indication, I was right to." As the elevator doors opened and James disappeared inside, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe she didn't have everything figured out yet, but for the first time in years, she believed she might be on the right path. A month into her new role at Mercer Enterprises, Elena found herself thriving in ways she hadn't thought possible. The work was challenging, yes, but it was also invigorating. Each day, she felt sharper, more confident, and more determined to prove to herself, and to James, that she deserved this opportunity. The support system within the company amazed her. Samantha's mentorship had been a game changer, and her teammates were quick to lend a hand when she struggled. For the first time, Elena felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. Yet, a lingering sense of curiosity remained. Why had James Mercer gone out of his way to help her? He was kind and approachable whenever their paths crossed, but there was a distance to him, a careful boundary that made her hesitant to pry. That question hovered in her mind one morning when she received an unexpected email from James's executive assistant: "Mr. Mercer would like to see you in his office at 2 p.m. Elena's stomach flipped. Had she done something wrong? Was this the beginning of the end? She spent the rest of the day trying to focus, but her mind kept circling back to the meeting. At precisely 2 p.m., Elena stood outside James's office. The glass door was slightly ajar, revealing a room that exuded quiet power: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, dark wood furniture, and shelves lined with books and awards. She knocked lightly, and James's deep voice beckoned her inside. Elena. Please, sit." She complied, her hands resting nervously in her lap. James leaned back in his chair, his usual calm demeanor putting her slightly at ease. "You've been here a month now," he began. "How are you finding the work?" "It's been amazing," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Challenging, but in the best way. I feel like I'm learning something new every day." He smiled. "Good. That's what I hoped to hear." There was a pause, and Elena's nerves surged again. "Mr. Mercer, is something wrong? Did I make a mistake?" James shook his head. "Not at all. In fact, I called you here to discuss something important, something personal. Elena frowned, her curiosity piqued. I owe you an explanation, he said, his tone shifting to one of quiet intensity. When I offered you this job, it wasn't just because of what happened that day in the crosswalk, though your bravery played a part. It was because I recognized you. She blinked, startled. You recognized me? James leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. Do you remember applying to Mercer Enterprises 2 years ago? Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had applied. It was during a particularly rough patch, and she'd submitted an application on a whim. When she never heard back, she assumed she wasn't what they were looking for. I reviewed your file back then, James continued, his voice calm but earnest. Your resume stood out, but I hesitated. I thought, here's someone with immense potential, but she needs more experience. It wasn't an easy decision, but ultimately, we went with someone else. Elena's chest tightened. I had no idea. I regretted that decision, he said. When I saw you again that day, I knew I couldn't make the same mistake twice. The way you acted, without hesitation, putting someone else's safety above your own, it confirmed what I'd already suspected. You're exactly the kind of person we need here. Elena's mind raced. All this time, she'd thought the job offer was a fluke, some twist of fate she couldn't explain. But now, hearing James's words, she realized it wasn't luck at all. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. For giving me this chance. He nodded, his expression softening. You earned it, Elena. And I have no doubt you'll continue to. As the weeks turned into months, Elena's role at Mercer Enterprises grew. She tackled increasingly complex projects, impressing not only her colleagues but also herself. Her relationship with James evolved as well. While he maintained a professional distance, there was an undeniable camaraderie between them, a shared understanding that neither of them voiced but both felt deeply. One afternoon, as she prepared a presentation for a major client, James stopped by her desk. How's it coming along? He asked, glancing at her screen. Almost ready, she replied, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. You'll do great, he said confidently. I've seen what you're capable of. For a moment, Elena looked at him, wondering how different her life would have been if she hadn't taken that leap, if she hadn't run into the street that rainy morning. Thank you, she said softly. Not just for this, but for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. James smiled, the kind of smile that felt rare and genuine. You're the one who made it happen, Elena. I just gave you the opportunity. As he walked away, Elena turned back to her screen, a small smile playing on her lips. Her journey hadn't been easy, and she knew there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face them. Because sometimes, saving someone else's life can end up saving your own. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel and enjoy these other amazing stories.